Hi guys, my name is Borrodante. Now let's talk about why you should make your own damn brushes. And how. Now, of course, I get this a lot. People constantly ask me to share my brushes, and for me, of course, it's very easy to just share them and appear as a nice guy who shares the brushes for everybody for free and everyone's happy. But today I decided to go the actual proper hard way about it. I know it will not stop people from asking for new brushes because there's always new people. Nothing ever stops in the comment section, but at least I'll have a video to respond to it. So this is what this video is gonna be about. Why you shouldn't ask for anyone's brushes, why you should create your own, and how to do it. So let's start. Now, the main misconception that I stumble upon a lot is the attitude towards the brushes. Most beginner artists think that you can just get a set of brushes for painting different surfaces, different types of objects, and just use them and they're gonna be perfect. Kind of the way the traditional brushes work. When you have a brush, this brush will be used for certain things and it's just a brush as it is, you can't change it. And this is not how things work in digital painting. Oh, of course, everything I'm gonna be talking about is about my art style, so maybe someone just makes drawings and colorizes them quickly with a set of brushes that don't need any changes, any adjustments. This is not how I do it. Now, the actual way you use a brush, as you can see, I have like a set of brushes right here, right? And then I have like blenders. And this is like a lot of brushes, and many people think that I actually use them all the time. I only use one brush. The rest of them, all of these are the legacy. Like different other shapes that I created within the few latest years, and I just haven't gotten to throw them away yet, because what if I'll find this shape kind of interesting again to use in some painting. Many of these brushes, except for very few exceptions, I just drew myself in a Photoshop document. You just create a new document, a rectangular one. 500 pixels is more than enough for any shape, and you just go ahead and you just paint your shape, whatever you want it to be, then you go edit and press define brush preset. You name it, and there you have it right here as a shape. So you can really quickly and easily do this to find your own shape that you're comfortable with, the way you paint. And this is really important because understanding how brushes work, how to set them up, is supposed to be a part of your workflow. This is a part of your art style, the way your brushes act. Not only the shape of them, the shape is a very small portion of it. Much more important is what's going on in the settings everywhere. And another important thing, this is kind of about my art style, but I also think that in most high-level skill kind of art styles that are supposed to look like really good, rich painting, you're only supposed to use one brush per painting. Maybe changing some settings in it every now and then during the process, but definitely use the same shape of the brush with the same texture. And this is really important. I mentioned it a couple of times in some overpaints that we did recently, and that's because whenever you use some kind of different brush for certain objects, like a cloud brush for clouds, it will stand out as just something that you photoshopped into the painting. It's not a part of it. It just won't work with the rest of the painting. It will have a different quality. So you have to paint everything with just one brush. It seems like it's harder to do, but if you do it right, it's much easier because you don't have to change your tool at all. At this point, it's really important to understand the whole no silhouette approach of painting that I've been talking a lot in this tutorial, for instance, if I don't forget to add the link. If you don't stick to just paint perfectly one shape, one surface, and then the other shape, the other surface separately, and actually approach the whole painting as a reflected light and kind of paint it the way the photo effect would do, when on the early stage of your work you can see how this character right here, the image kind of looks like it's just out of focus. It's not unfinished, it just doesn't really have lighting on it, like it's dark, and it's also out of focus, blurry, the way the real photography blur would work. And this is the kind of approach, if you ever maybe heard when they say a good artist can drop a painting at any point and it will look good. At any stage of your painting, it should look kind of finished. It's just not very detailed, it's just up to you how much detail you want to drop into it, but whenever you just stop painting, it will be a finished piece of a certain level of detail. But all that, of course, is for another video about how you paint and not about the whole brushes talk, but this is kind of the point, that it's really really connected. The way you have your brushes set up is seamlessly connected to the way you use them. And this is why asking someone for their brushes makes zero sense, and it's usually like, I think any professional artist that shares their brushes, they realize that it's a little bit hypocritical to do, because it's not really gonna help you. It just looks nice to do it. Without knowing the approach exactly, like without actually learning from that artist, you have nothing to do with these brushes. You won't be able to use them properly. And if you do learn their process, you will learn how to make their brushes and you won't need them anyway. You will make your own. So this is really important. Knowing how to set up your brushes will actually improve your skill. Now, I said I use one brush per painting. Sometimes it's two brushes if I have sketch initially, which I don't do a lot, but sometimes if it's a complex painting, I would create a sketch. That would require a second brush, which is kind of like a pencil. That's it, that's all you need, tops. A lot of the times just one paintbrush will do. And yeah, the rest of the brushes, as well as using them for legacy, sometimes I keep them for different moods or kind of a bit of a different art styles. But again, those art styles are to support any kind of mood I want to have. For instance, this brush right now, it kind of looks like a bit of a broken brick, so it will look kind of sharp and things will look a bit rough, a bit concrete kind of, but it doesn't mean that you only paint actual concrete with it. As you can see, I have no concrete in this image, like maybe the floor is concrete, but I don't know. I paint the whole character this way. So yeah, these are the actual stages. Just first I looked for some kind of location, spots. It's not a real place even. Then added the silhouette, searching for details in like the fog. I'll talk about it in a moment. Then I started adding some details with some color, and then I zoomed in and added even more details. You can find this work on my Instagram. So yeah, all of this metal, this kind of like fur, leathery straps, some torn cloth, everything was painted with just one brush. If I would have like a plate with a pie next to this character and a baby, they would be painted with the same brush as well, and they would look like a pie and a baby. It doesn't matter, because what your brush paints is not the actual surfaces, is not the actual materials, but the light reflected from them. That's why it doesn't really matter what the shape of the brush is like. Shape doesn't really matter, texture doesn't really matter. As a general rule of thumb for a universal brush to just paint everything with, the shape of the brush should kind of be close to round, maybe slightly rectangular if you want it to be, if you find it cool for you to work with. You just create a shape and then you try it and you see what you like more. But generally, I find the shape that is kind of close to a circle, even though it may have all kinds of details and complexity in it, but overall the shape of it should be kind of round. This kind of brush will always save you a lot of time comparing to any kind of complex like long brush or like triangular or perfectly rectangular. When you have like sharp, obvious shapes of the brush, you spend a lot of time removing these obvious parts of these shapes in all the details, and that kills a lot of time. So it's best to work with kind of a round shape. And the texture, well, it really doesn't matter. Again, just import any kind of seamless texture, look it up on Google, and just try it and set it up, and you will have, like, I have some kind of resemblance of a canvas texture, like a clothy canvas texture, but not really. This is not an actual canvas. This is my texture that I created like, I don't know, 6 months ago, and I use it all the time, everywhere, in all programs. And this texture kind of becomes my signature in a way, because it sort of reveals itself in every stroke, creating a uniform yet nice touch to every brush stroke. Like, it's a simple brush stroke right here, but it has this complex shape just because texture is eating it away where I press slightly. So it's a good time saver, especially if you want to paint some quick strokes here and there. And you do, why not? Not every single part of the painting deserves to have like a 1 pixel size details, you know? So adding some texture, some touch to your brush strokes is a good idea to have just a better quality of the appearance of the strokes when they appear raw in the image. So yeah, find your favorite kind of shape and your favorite kind of texture and use them in your brush. Now let's talk about how I set them up with a bare minimum of settings, which is exactly how you should do it. So first of all, I have shape dynamics on, but really you pretty much don't need it. As you can see, all I use in here is a slight change of size with the pen pressure, but it's like 5% change. You literally don't see any change of the size when I change the pressure. I always paint with like a stroke that doesn't change the brush size, and I think it's really important to have that. If you want to paint with the whole idea of showing the reflected light and not just separate surfaces, to have the kind of art style that I have, it's best to use the brush that doesn't change the size as you change the pressure. You should only change the opacity. Because what happens when you make an image out of focus? Like this. This is pretty much the way I paint. This would be like a second, third stage of painting. Pretty much everything is visualized. You can see all the colors, you can see a good contrast. The blacks, the brights are all in place. It looks like the image is completely finished, but it's just out of focus. This is the way I paint, and this is literally what you're looking at right now. Now, can you find a single detail right here that would require a tiny brush? You won't, because literally everything is painted with the dots like this. These red dots from my Christmas lights that show the bokeh effect, they show exactly the shape and the size of the brush that this whole video is painted with right now. And this looks pleasing to the eye when you simulate this kind of look. When the image doesn't have a lot of detail, it should kind of resemble the out of focus effect. It looks cool, it looks realistic, and well, just like a grown-up style, you know? It looks like a real thing. So that's exactly why you should never change the size of the brush in a certain stage. I do a little 95%, but really I think I shouldn't even do it because it doesn't really do anything, does it? Yeah, like I don't see any difference. I think it would actually work better for me without any shape dynamics at all. So let's turn off the texture right now and talk about a very important part is the transfer effects, which is literally the transparency controls. Now this is the thing that I really missed in Procreate because it doesn't have it. Also Infinite Painter in Android and iOS. It also has this engine that has a really good blending, but it has only one kind of transparency. And Photoshop and many desktop software has two types of transparency, and it's really important, and let me show you why. So right now I only have flow on, like it's being controlled with pen pressure, and the minimum is 0. So when I press really slightly, we have a very transparent stroke, and then when I go stronger, it becomes more opaque. It looks kind of like a trail of smoke, because literally every copy of the pattern of the brush becomes more transparent, and they all together create this semi-transparent trail of copies of the shape. So this is what flow control looks like. Now for the opacity control. These two modes, they usually have different names in different programs. Sometimes it's opacity and flow, sometimes it's opacity and transparency. I think that's how it goes in PaintStorm Studio. Sometimes they choose different words, very weird ones, but you will always find these two kind of together if the program has them. So right now, this is what opacity control looks like. As you can see, in this case, the transparency is not applied to every separate copy of the brush pattern, but it's applied to the stroke as a whole. And this is a very important mode. If the first one, the flow, adds sort of a nice touch to the brush stroke and adds some sort of depth to it, the opacity control lets you work in this kind of searching the shape in the fog approach. So let's say in here, I'm gonna be adding some kind of piece of armor. I'm gonna use my brush with all the settings on. So I'm gonna be doing this. As you can see, right now I pressed very slightly with the color of the brush being completely white, and it appears like it's just gray color. And then I'll just press stronger and I'll add some kind of plane to it. And I'm just looking for a shape like this. Then I release the stroke. All of this was just one brush stroke. Then I'll do it again right here. I'll add some value in here, maybe in here a little bit. And then I want to add some kind of indent in here. I'll choose a really dark, close to black color, and I add this kind of stuff. Then, without changing any color or anything, I create a second brush stroke, and I add like another plane of that indent. And just going back and forth, I get to work with different shades of the same color, choosing a really extreme color, but then I'm able to work with a very subtle middle color between what's already in the canvas and the end color of the brush. So this way you can create this effect of depth. You can go deeper into the painting like this, or get closer to the viewer by pressing stronger. Like in here, I would add a dude like this. I'm using this dark color. This is gonna be an awesome dude, right? So I'm adding some details, and I'm going back and forth with this optical effect. Exactly the way it went in the out of focus video that we looked at a moment ago. And you see, the shape is really lame. I'm not thinking about what this second character will actually look like, but it looks sort of realistic just rendering wise. So this is what the opacity control lets you do. It's a really important kind of transparency control for the brush. And this is what Procreate on iPad Pro doesn't have. And why we use flow together with the opacity is because flow is directly connected to the appearance of the texture. So as you can see, I have all this foggy effect on this character, but it has texture appearing everywhere all over the strokes of it. And without flow, it would look a lot more flat, like it would have some texture on the very edges, but in the middle it won't really appear all that much, so it would look kind of flat and a little bit digital. So by adding flow control, we get a lot more natural and nice looking brush strokes with the good revealance of the texture in them. So yeah, having both controls on, I usually have minimum for opacity at about 20%. It works really well. Now for the texture. The texture itself you should find with a good range of contrast, meaning it should have almost black details and almost white details in somewhat of a uniform fashion, and it's really good if it would also be a seamless texture. In Google, just look up seamless textures. It kind of looks like a white noise from the distance, which is a good sign for a texture. So I like the mode multiply. Applying texture for each tip is important because this is exactly what connects the texture with the whole flow control. Usually if in your program there is no option like this, it's usually on by default. Yeah, multiply mode seems to work really well. And then you just tweak these settings to find the kind of appearance of the texture and the stroke that you would find working for you. Now, generally, texture is also not necessary. All you really need to paint is a shape and the control of transparency. So, pretty much we can turn off everything but the transfer with the pen pressure control for flow and opacity, and you could paint the same kind of character. It would just look a lot smoother because it won't have any texture applied to it. But in case with this artwork, it wouldn't work really well because I have a lot of very raw brush strokes all over the place, and they look much nicer with the texture applied to them. So yeah guys, I guess this is it. This is all you need to set up a good brush. Pretty much just apply a texture in probably multiply mode and search for a good look, but only do that after you set up a proper control for opacity. And don't use the control for the size of the brush stroke with a pen pressure, because it's really only gonna be standing in your way. Ask me more questions in the comments if you have any, and this is literally all I can really share with you brush-wise, because giving you actual brushes won't help you much at all. During the process, sometimes you would find that you want like to smooth out some surfaces or to add some very subtle details or reveal more texture. In that case, I usually just change the control of flow. I also do that with a keyboard, just pressing the numbers. And for these numbers to actually change the flow and add opacity, make sure you have build up checkbox on. Alright, this is it. And I thank you for watching if you did. I guess you did. If you're here, leave a like and subscribe. Tell a friend. Ask me to share my brushes again. Do whatever you want. And I will see you in the next one. Bye! This double opacity control, by the way, was the main reason for me to stop using iPad for work.